I think we have a very talented panelists today to discuss the topics that Mr. Aho has presented in his video. I think there are many keywords that will serve as a food for thought to tackle the issue that we're supposed to discuss today, which is global economic development. And I wanted to introduce myself and also explain what's going to be my role as a moderator today. My name is Kohei Nishiyama. I'm from Japan. I'm an entrepreneur. And I believe my role here is to be an agent of all of you. I am here to ask questions that you wanted to ask them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm extremely pleased to be here. I'm Nila Leiserowitz. I'm managing principal of Gensler. Gensler is a full service design firm providing services for our clients around architecture, interior design, branding, graphics, and strategy. My responsibilities for the firm, I've been with the firm over 16 years, and my responsibilities is to lead one of the regions. We have 8 regions across the globe, and I'm a leader of the North Central region in North America. Gensler has 40 offices across the globe, approximately 3,000 people, and we are a very user-centric organization and find that design is fundamental to the success of our clients and their business.
Valery?
Hi, I'm also very delighted to be here with all of you today. I'm Valery Jacobs, and I'm the Vice President of LPK and the Group Creative Director of the Trends Group. I'm a trend forecaster, and what that means is I use the skills of intense curiosity to help report the news from the edges, to design future states, and help our designers and teams design for the world of tomorrow instead of just today. The company I work for is a brand identity agency. We work on strategies for the future, and we design a lot of packaging. We have offices all over the globe, and I'm excited to be here to journey into the future with all of you today.
Emily?
Hi, Emily Campbell. Likewise, delighted. I'm Director of Design at the RSA, which is a 250-year-old membership society founded in the 18th century to pursue enterprises for the common good. That is for a common wealth, as distinct from private wealth, although, of course, these things are not entirely distinct, as Mr. Aho said. There is profit-making is a social asset. So its full title is the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. And that full title betrays its ancient relationship with design, before design even had a name, with enterprises and inventions and devices for the common good. And my role as Director of Design is to renew and make relevant its account of design. I expect to be saying a little bit more about that as the conversation develops.
Thank you. So I took a note while I was listening to Mr. Aho's speech. There were many keywords that I wanted to ask the panelists. And one of them was a Japanese proverb he used, and it went as vision without execution is daydream, but execution without vision is nightmare. And since we have a trend forecaster here, she's a specialist on vision making and scenario writing. Can you sort of refer your thoughts on that comment?
Sure. We believe that trends are a very important part of design because what you need to do is develop your idea of what the future is going to be like. I believe that in the business that we're in, and my particular company, people use research all the time to validate findings or to create reams and reams of data. And what that does is it helps us understand where we are today. But most of the time, in our fields, the work we're doing doesn't come into the market for years. So if we only design based on what we know today, When our designs hit the market 2 years, 4 years, 7 years down the road, they'll be irrelevant. So if you can create scenarios of the future, understand what people want to do, be, and become, we can design in a way that makes our efforts more relevant in the future. So that's putting the vision and the execution together to create a future-forward reality that's filled with foresight and insight, rather than just designing something based on what we know today.
I mean, you're welcome to jump in anytime, but since now you wanted to
You know,
speak.
it's interesting to talk about strategy and vision. Earlier there was comments about actually taking risk, and I think the people that are really visionary are people that are comfortable getting outside the comfort zone, understanding as to jump over the ledge and fly, like Sasha said, and working with companies across the world. I think the ones that are most visionary are working in a world that is outside the comfort zone, but they realize they have to do that to really move an organization forward.
Please.
What interests me really, and the RSA with its interest in human capability, is how anyone develops a vision. It's often said that technology is simply an enabler, but an enabler for what? For what vision? I explained that my job has been to renew the account of design for the RSA, which for the last 100 years has really concentrated on championing professional excellence in design. And at this point, when I arrived at the RSA 3 years ago, I felt for many reasons, not least because so many other organizations champion professional excellence in design, we needed a new argument. And the argument that I and our chief executive, Matthew Taylor, came up with is that design is, in its essence, a kind of resourcefulness. It's an ability to make something out of what is available. And designers are very practiced and deliberate about that. But actually, it is a mistake to think of design, as it tends to be thought of, simply as a professional discipline, as a professional capability. And what we're trying to do is argue that actually this resourcefulness needs to be a more generic, distributed capacity that we encourage in everybody. So it's a radical proposal to teach more people design better, really. And the way that I think this connects to the execution and vision analogy is that if you learn design, what you're learning to think about what the material world, what you want the material world to be like, and how you want it to work. And that's really a very good training for developing a vision, so that you're not just using technology to execute, but you actually have a vision that you're trying to put into practical action in a deliberate way.
So Emily, basically what you're saying is that anyone can be a visionary if education is given in such a way that everyone can actually think in a design way. Is that what you're saying?
I think that we can all be helped. We can all be given, if you will, a methodology or a structured approach to creativity which can help us to change the world around us.
We can have billions of Steve Jobs on this planet if you're successful.
I'm not saying that everybody can be a virtuoso, no.
It's too bad.
The vision that I suppose I and the RSA have is that we encourage people to go into the world not simply as a consumer, but as a designer, that is, as someone who has some sense of their ability to change what is around them, who knows how it is designed and that it can be redesigned.
Let me jump into that point. So I know you have been involved into a project where you are converting consumer into participants of social or maybe public service, contributor. Can you introduce to us what's happening in the UK and how the government is enhancing individual users to be part of this social act?
It's complex, I'll try to be brief, but our argument about design and resourcefulness was a fairly direct response to the public agenda of participation, which is very strong in the UK and in other parts of Europe and the United States, I think. Particularly in the United Kingdom, there is a sense that for example, the public services system that was developed in the post-war period is no longer adequate to deal with the complexity and diversity of society. We've also had, financial crisis. We have, continuing diminution of the Earth's resources of energy and materials. And in all sorts of ways, we are going to have to think differently about production. And so, particularly with respect to the agenda of participation, design, particularly co-design, has often been invoked as a way to get people more involved in finding solutions to the social and public aspects of their lives.
I believe that was recently that UK government announced that people can retire only 3 years after. Now they're retiring at the age of 68, something like that.
Going up, yes.
So we have more people working, forced to work, or maybe be a contributor to society, right? And I think UK is setting up a tone to a global society that individuals are no longer allowed to just be consumer, but be part of this social system. And Mr. Aho mentioned that there are many silos in this society, and we need to think in a systemic way, which I can maybe translate this in a holistic way, where we can overcome the boundaries and work together in a way. But it's always a difficult thing to cross the borderline, because simply the languages are different. Public sectors and private sectors talk differently, as Mr. Aho said. And I know, Nila, you work with big companies. Your clients must be big, and you're designing workplaces for all these people to interact. I know the admin side are very bureaucratic, whereas designers are not. But you're supposed to, give result output. How do you do that? Can you extend your work at large to the global scale, or maybe to the social scale?
Well, it's interesting. I think if you look at top-performing companies, which this afternoon I'll share results, some research we've done, top-performing companies across the globe think in a more integrated model, understanding the value that different perspectives and diversity brings to actually creating product or solving. So when we go into a company, and Emily, I do embrace that the public is educated in design. I know there's a little controversial amongst designers feeling like, should everyone be educated as we are? I totally embrace it, because I feel an educated client is a great client, and I think it allows for a conversation around how it is we look for opportunities to provide the solutions for our clients, no matter what part of the world. But the top performing companies are already embracing diversity. They're understanding the importance of going across disciplines in order to deliver. I think the thing that holds companies back is when you have individuals in a leadership role that feel like they have to control, and the control meaning information is theirs and they hold it close to their chest and do not want to share. So part of our responsibility when we go in with a client, we really go through an exercise up front, and we have a lot of different tools to really get at the core of what we're trying to solve for, and trying to gauge a large population of the people within the organization to then determine how it is collectively we can come up with a solution.
Well, one area, if not Japan or maybe US, needs to have a reform is the healthcare sector. And we know doctors and patients are not talking. So this is one area we need to have a completely new way of thinking. And there have been many attempts in the United States and Japan to cross the border and have participatory, if not, but ways to use technology or new thinking to simply be more efficient. And I know you have been working in the healthcare sector as well. This is unusual because you usually work for office or workplace, yes, but this is hospital. So can you introduce, give us a vivid example of what you do as a Gensler?
Well, it's a new world for us in health and wellness, and it's an area that we haven't really participated a lot in until recently. And we say health and wellness because, again, we want to take a more holistic perspective in terms of how we look at design. And it's interesting, I have a background, I worked at a firm, Perkins & Will, and actually worked on healthcare, and then I went kind of quiet for 15 years, so it's nice to be back in this world. We were just selected for a project, and I'll tell you briefly why about this project. It's the Rehab Institute. It's one of the largest rehab institutes in the world, and it's for spinal injuries and brain injuries, very, very traumatic injuries to people. And one of the reasons we were selected, we partnered with a firm that has great depth, HDR, in research around healthcare and the kind of technical part, the day-to-day operations of running an institution. But the reason they told us we were hired because we, Gensler, brought the user perspective. Because we've been working in interiors for over 50 years as a firm, all of us focused on the user experience, and that translates really nicely into healthcare. So in this particular case, the rehab is going to be an incubator for translational medicine, which is basically bringing the researchers, the clinicians, and the patients together to actually go from care to cure.
I mean, I think Gensler is doing a terrific job, but the problem is not all hospitals or countries can afford to pay Gensler. I mean, they're good, but they're very expensive.
Oh, not necessarily.
Well,
get your value.
We know. But I mean, I'm interested to listen to Emily because in case where we cannot afford to pay Gensler, you seem to have an example where you at the bottom side there is a solution, and you're working with those, you know.
Yes, a key word here being rehabilitation. Having claimed on behalf of the RSA that made this bold claim that learning design can help everyone, people and communities become more resourceful and self-reliant, obviously the sensible thing would be to find a testing ground for that hypothesis. And so we thought hard about who really needs to be resourceful. And we proposed a program of design training for people in rehabilitation for spinal cord injury, paraplegics and tetraplegics. Because of course spinal cord injury, if you break your back or break your neck, you do experience a very sudden and dramatic loss of resources, and from there on out your independence will be a different kind of challenge than it has been hitherto. So we propose design training as a component of rehabilitation. So in rehabilitation you will you learn how to transfer in and out of your wheelchair, to empty your own bladder and bowels, all sorts of means of achieving independence. And we argued that actually, as well, you might learn design, you might learn a structured approach to problem solving and so forth. And we ran a pilot workshop last November with 8 participants. We ran a 3-day design workshop. Day 1, the skills of observation. Day 2, the skills of analysis. All the time trying to get the participants to understand that design wasn't simply random acts of styling, but design is actually a logical and coherent thinking process, and hence the day of analysis. And then a day of opportunity, a day of turning that into recognizing design opportunities. And one of the participants said this. He said that thinking about things, analyzing them, taking them apart like a designer does, really helps you to think, what can I control here? And that's a very powerful concept. Those were his words. I think it's true. And we're actually now running this project in 3 of the 11 spinal injuries units in the United Kingdom with 3 separate universities delivering the training.
This is very interesting, and I'm gonna get to Valery because I think it's connected to what you do. But Emily, what you're saying is that if you give a right kind of education to the least educated in terms of design patient, they can be innovative and inventive to provide toolkits like wheelchairs or emptying the bowels, and they can have hope for the future that doctor cannot give to them?
Yes, I think in a way there are 3 levels of outcome that I might expect. At a most basic level, I would want anyone discharged from rehabilitation for spinal cord injury to know that there's something out there that can help them, and it's called design. The way the world isn't necessarily the way it needs to be, just because it's given that way. And at a slightly higher level, you might encourage discharged patients to be more confident about, for example, customizing products that come from the occupational therapist's catalogue. And then at an even higher level, I would really hope to encourage more young people who have suffered spinal cord injury to go into design as a profession.
So I think this is very inspiring. But Valery, you're saying that the past data set is not really useful to predict the future. But here, people are now converting their everyday life with hope by learning design. And I think they have a new set of data, if not, thinking that, you can use it as a trend focusing. How do you perceive all of these happening? Okay.
Well, first of all, I think what Emily's saying is very provocative, but at the same time, it's indicative of a huge shift. What we see is that all of this technology is really an enabler, and the technology has also sort of democratized design anyway. And one of the biggest trends that we see would be around maker culture or hacker culture, where people are already taking the tools into their own hands. So design needs to get into the conversation to establish sort of the process or the ground rules for translation and collaboration. And so I think what Emily's talking about is really extracting the design process and sharing it, because people are already doing it. And I think your business illuminates this as well. It's sort of this idea that there are platforms for sharing, for spanning distance, time, etc., that we never had before. And there's this huge blurring of reality and the virtual. And so I think that that's the future we have to design into, is the intangible.
Nila?
I think as designers, we have all of us had a relationship in terms of what it is we create, whether it's product or spaces, and its relationship to people. How does this tool feel? How does this great teapot feel when you hold it? How does this space feel? And it's interesting, on a slightly different note, but a similar note, when Emily and I were talking last night about technology being an enabler, and we were talking about the exchange of information. And technology is a really great tool for exchanging information. We all have access to it. We can Google, we can find out about a lot of things and get informed. But the true means of really understanding the essence of the problem, whether you're a designer or a business person, is communications. Because when you're really communicating person to person, you're sharing knowledge. And that's fundamentally different than just getting information.
Right. Mr. Apple said that applying the technology is the most important key for success. And what we're observing here, maybe what we're by listening to you, we're getting a sense that individuals, formerly called consumers, are now having these skill sets to apply technologies that are available in front of them by customizing or inventing, reinventing things. Is that what we're observing today?
One of the terms that has come out in the recent years is prosumer. So it could imply producer and consumer together, or it could also sort of imply positive consumption versus con being negative, so a prosumer. So I think that that's really sort of indicative of the shift.
I have a limited knowledge, but prosumer is a word coined by Alvin Toffler in 1970s, and it's a combination of producer and consumer together. So the future is happening here. I think he has mentioned this word in a book called Third Wave, and I think it's very euphoric because Mr. Aho said we are having the second massive revolution of mobile technology, and you also coined this as a huge shift. So at the edge of this huge shift, you want to say something? Yes, go ahead.
And you finished. Go on, you left us with a cliffhanger at the end of this huge shift. It was interesting that Valery, that you mentioned hacking and maker culture. Two of the pamphlets that I've produced at the RSA in this Design and Resourcefulness series, one of them is about hacking in design, and the other one is about rapid prototyping as potentially a medium for everybody to be a maker. On this issue of the very, very wide access to technology that potentially, perhaps, makes everyone into a producer, I was having a conversation recently with my former boss, Michael Beirut, who's one of the partners of Pentagram in New York. And he, several years ago, maybe 12 or 15 years ago, Pentagram had paid quite a lot of money, many thousands of dollars, to a sort of whizzy multimedia company to make an animation about Pentagram, a piece of moving graphic design. And that actually, of course, today, a teenager could make that overnight in their bedroom. And so I think this really raises a big question for design education, really. I mean, what price judgment and vision? If everybody has access to technology, then what will differentiate one technologically, a high-tech produced product from the next?
I also want to offer another interpretation of the theme, which is kind of we're hinting at here. So if you view the theme as design at the edges, perhaps the role of design in the future will be designing the edges. So it's less about designing the final thing, but coming up with, say, the edges or the parameters. So we have to, as designers, get much more comfortable with designing the context for meaning, or the context for the idea, or the edges of the idea, and then allowing people to sort of finish the project, finish the product. And so I believe that there's going to be far more integration, because design in the future will be about designing the algorithm, the context, etc., instead of the actual finished thing that we unveil to great fanfare. It will be more about putting the tools of meaning making and experience creation in the hands of people.
I think the paramount example of this idea of the designer not finishing the job today is Elemental Architects' Half Houses project in Chile. I'm sure you're all aware of Alejandro Araveña's housing project, where the economic solution actually was not the housing project was not to build complete houses, but only to put in the parts that the architects, that the people, the residents of the houses themselves couldn't put in. So to put in the ground floor and the utilities, and then then the tenants qualify for these houses on the contractual understanding that they would finish the houses themselves. So it was a deliberately unfinished design project that they left the job half done, and it's of course it's actually a very analog example of what you're talking about.
Well, I think another example of that is in the work environment is actually creating an environment where people have choice. Again, creating the framework in which an organization can reinforce their brand and their mission, bring people together around a common purpose. But we're finding across the globe that we need to give environments. It's not the word flexibility. I know we use adaptability and flexibility. That's one component. But it's really more the opportunity for people to have choice in terms of how they want to work, even when they're in the office, in order for them to be most effective.
Well, I think definitely we're observing something very big, and we're all excited that this is happening, because it's for us. It's not against us. Mr. Apple mentioned a quote from Gladwell's book, and 5 things that in the book mentioned was right timing, right talent, right ecosystem, is what we have talked, risk-taking capacity, and revolutionary technology. But are we taking enough risks? Are we just being critics? Are we doing something to make it happen? Are you doing something?
Everyone does something in a small way. Whether the answer is yes, the short answer, and I can speak personally for myself. Am I doing as much as I would like? No, not really. And I just say that as I constantly try to do more, and I'd like to do more. And sometimes there's all these opposing forces that push back, and sometimes I can go through them, and sometimes I can't. But I'm always up for more. So hopefully I can continue to push.
Let me rephrase my question. What are the kind of risks that we need to take to make a change happen, a tangible one? What are the kind of risks that we all have to take as designers or creative thinkers? Invest or do something differently?
I actually think that a powerful thing we can do is get out of our own comfort zone. And actually that's the first thing we assign when we teach trend forecasting class in the university setting, or when we do a workshop, is we ask people to, for a moment, pretend that your own experience isn't all there is. So how can you put yourself in someone else's shoes? How can you do something different to challenge your own self? And I think that Mr. Aho said that because he said, as designers, what we can do is challenge the mindset. But the first mindset we have to challenge is our own.
Great. Emily?
The relationship between risk and design is a peculiar one because, in essence, design is open-ended and you don't know what the answer is when you embark on a design project. Interestingly, the IDA statement about free pitching is a good example of this. The reason I think that free pitching exists is that clients want to see the answer before they pay any money. They sort of, don't go into this in an attitude of trust that talent and creativity will out, but they want to know what the answer is before they even enter a contract, which is why they should pay for it, of course. The particular aspect of this that I'm dealing with at the moment is in high school education. I said that I tested our theory about design and resourcefulness in an acute context. It has an attitude to risk which is very, very difficult to square with professional design as we know it. It's been really hamstrung by the requirements of assessment and evaluation, and so leaves very little room for the practice of design in the classroom to be anything like the open-ended process that design is at its best and its most fertile.
Yes?
So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results, and I think Emily just said it, is actually taking a look at a process in a much more creative way and not assuming you have to do it the same way.
Well, how about technology? I mean, can you mention one single technology that you think is really revolutionary that could change our deeds? Maybe I'll start with Valery. Maybe you know too much. Maybe it's a secret of yours you don't want to mention to us, but...
Okay, say that again. One piece of technology
that you think is most revolutionary that will change the discipline of designers or creative thinkers.
Well, I'm going to change the question a little bit so that I can use it.
Yes, please.
Since our previous speaker was talking about mobile devices, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What I think is fascinating about the cell phone and mobile technology is that we tend to think of it, at least from a very Western standpoint. Let's be real. It's fashion. It's a status item. People wait in line sometimes for these things overnight in front of big glass illuminated boxes. And but at the same time,
is that an apple? The piece
with a giant logo of
Great
the forbidden fruit of knowledge gleaming in the sky like a beacon. But at the same time, he's showing something that's 13 euros, and that in many ways is not a status item, but it's a device for empowerment, and it's a tool. And so when Mr. Aho was talking about applying technology, what we see are lots of designers that are applying the technology and the platform. And so I was thinking last night, you asked me about mobile devices, and I was thinking about how in developing nations, one of the things that these devices are being used for, so we use them to, chit chat and mail photos, and does this outfit look cute? Hey, look at this XYZ. But in developing nations, they are now developing applications that can, in the field, real time, say for example, determine whether or not a well is still working. So if all of these NGOs are putting wells in, it really doesn't matter that they've put in a certain number of wells, it's whether or not water is running from the wells. So they can real time take pictures, upload on the applications, use GPS to make a real time map of the water. They can use it to send out, they can use text messaging to send out reminders to HIV patients and or other patients to comply with their medicine. They can use these applications to do microfinancing and banking. So these are tools, these technological tools are enabling people in ways that we never meant for them to.
It's almost like a social enabler or mobile phone connected to a very light application that enables people to participate for big social
social engineering is
maybe
sort of what it would be.
Emily, you are welcome to change that question. But
I'm not going to change the question. I'm just going to be a bit of an old stick in the mud and say, you know, I declare that I think technology is only as good as the people using it. Nicholson Baker, in his little homage to Steve Jobs in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago, had a lovely phrase about how what Steve Jobs had done had created wonderful myriad ways to communicate with people who are not in the same room as you. And of course that's true. Above all, you know, technology has given us ways to communicate. I'm not entirely convinced that technology in itself makes people inherently better at thinking or more creative.
Well, it's interesting you said that. I think technology is fantastic. You know, my skill set's though, just so you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe on a good day is 6.5. So maybe that's part of it. But to be really honest with you, is I think sometimes it's a crutch for how we communicate. And I say that because, again, in a lot of work we do is we strongly encourage that people come together at the beginning of trying to identify what it is or how it is they want to work together to create the trust. And I find when people set up these video conferences or all these wonderful ways of communicating to kick off a relationship or to identify a problem, more often than not, the solution isn't as effective or the people haven't established that relationship. So physical connect, being in the room with someone, reading the body language, seeing how you're sitting there, still is extremely powerful. And I think technology can support us if you start out with that assumption.
I think we have heard Mr. Aho mention the word from Mr. Steve Jobs. And Mr. Steve Jobs said that technology combined with liberal arts and I think contents makes technology, makes our heart sing. And I think it's not technology only, but it's also, what we have culturally or what we have learned as a liberal art is very important. So I'm not saying technology itself is the only solving element of this complex issue, but I think it's a great contributor. I think it's about time that we should let all of you be a complimentary of myself, because I think we have only 10 minutes left. So if you have any question, please raise your hand. And yeah, now I can see you there.
There are a lot of you out there.
3,000 people in this room.
You realize this is 3 times the size of the town I grew up in?
Yes, please. Gentleman with a white shirt. No, you. It's you, yeah.
Hello. I want to ask 3 ladies. I'm a design school student, so I want to ask you, do you have any ideas for our design school students? Thank you.
So the question was to all of you, any advices or ideas for design students?
Yeah, advice. And advice for students.
So advice for design students.
Well, I don't personally know your curriculum, and all the curriculums across the world are different, of course. But I think a couple things that I think are, when I look at resumes of potential people to join us, whether it's in, we call it the Middle Coast, which is Chicago, or in other parts of the world that I've recruited for, I look at diversity of experience and diversity of curriculum. And it's back to what we've been talking about before, is respect the curriculum you have that your school provides you, but look outside that curriculum and try to take some additional courses to get a very diverse opinion in terms of how it is you will be a designer in the world that we have. I also think in terms of a design student, I look at your outside activities, and I know this is going slightly off path, but I'll look at your contribution to society and how you played in that too. So it's not only a curriculum as a design student, but how you fit into the greater society in which you live and work.
I agree with what Nila said. If there's any opportunity to take classes in other disciplines, that would be very high on my list as well, to understand how different disciplines approach the problem solving or opportunity creation. I had another thought. It just comes right through.
That happens to me.
I'm sure when Emily starts talking, I'll remember it
It'll come back
immediately.
in 2 minutes.
I agree with Valerie and Nila, but I would just say don't forget to make things. Because however interdisciplinary and however much you mix it up with people from other disciplines, actually the thing that distinguishes you as a designer is that you practice your thinking on things. And however virtual your professional work becomes in the end, that's where you start.
Do you know your
I thought he
answer?
was going to say, what's my thesis idea?
Okay. So, any other questions? Well, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Edmund Lee of Hong Kong Design Center. And on the point that Emily talked about resourcefulness, I would like to ask or hear the panel views on what can we do to enrich the resourcefulness for designers and also the users of design.
Okay, so his question was on the word resourcefulness. I think we should begin defining what do you mean by resourcefulness, and then, yeah.
Well, I meant it in a very basic sense. As I said, the ability to make something out of whatever is available. I think of designers as particularly resourceful in the sense that they are quite ready to make something, to prototype and improvise. Whereas a lot of people who are not designers are quite intimidated by that. Don't ask me what it looks like. I can't draw, I can't make things. Designers are very easy about that. That's resourceful. That designers are professionally brave in the face of disorder and complexity, and that's part of your job. Designers, because of the essential training in making things, have a keen sense of how things are made and manufactured. This is all what I put together as the particular kind of resourcefulness that designers have.
And what do we do particularly to enhance or enrich the resourcefulness?
In the context of school, I'm rewriting the curriculum guidelines for this group of high schools that really focus on getting kids to think very, very hard about the way the material world around them is put together and how it works. That is, understanding fundamental concepts of structure and pattern, fabrication, signification, fundamental concepts that actually link very deeply with other things that they're learning in other subjects. So, for example, mathematics is hugely dependent on the concept of pattern.
So City of Hong Kong could hire you to rewrite all the curriculum for high schools. That's tangible. So, any other question? Yes, gentleman, which side? Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. I'm Izam from Malaysia, Malaysian Society of Interior Designers. I wouldn't say that I'm concerned. It's just with regards to changing mindset. How do we influence the leaders or the government, in this case, to support creativity and design? We can be standing on the edge, but nobody is pushing us off to fly. So, and then do you think that the leaders should be attending this kind of conferences instead of just the designers? To create awareness to that.
Good question, I suppose. So how do we change the political leaders? What could we do?
Well, I'm going at it via this rehabilitation issue in healthcare and via education, hoping to create case studies there that are powerful.
Well, I work in a business that's highly commercial. So the same tools that we use to create desire and selling our ideas to corporations, maybe it's the same idea, is to create desire from other to want to change. But it's a very challenging question. If I had the answers to that,
Have new clients.
I'd be at the, G something summit.
Well, it's interesting, is they should be here, but I also think it's our responsibility to truly provide a definition of what design can do, because I think people have a preconceived idea that it's maybe more aesthetic and less around metrics. So I think most people with that mindset have probably an understanding of what metrics mean. We'll do this, and this is how the results will be, and this is how it impacts your community. So I think connecting the dots sometimes would be very helpful.
Yes, when I said at the start that our design and resourcefulness thesis was a very direct response to this sort of public policy agenda of participation. And I think what that is in pursuit of the idea that citizens should have a greater sense of agency and should be able to act on that. That the government wants people to do more for themselves. And so what we're trying to create is case studies of how design helps people to do that, because design helps you to, in the phrase that I've used with these school children, design is one of the things that helps you change your world.
I think also Mr. Aho said, he was talking about that decisions shouldn't be made in silos, and that really what we need to do is combine the top-down approaches with the bottom-up approaches. So it kind of brings our conversation full circle, this idea of putting the power in the people, into the hands of the people, and allowing, creating the design translation to bring those constituencies together.
I think the answer is, well, not there, but like the concrete examples and showing that there is a great example. And if you can start bringing those examples in front of politicians, as you said, we can now create an ecosystem where citizens are providing a great example at the citizen level, and then at the political level, I think they cannot ignore those examples anymore. I think that's what you've been saying. So we have time for one more question. Okay, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm an architect from Cape Town. I'm impressed by the question that was asked by the student, and I'd like to add a word to what I think is important for students. And one of them is that go out there and go and find a practical experience so that you can test what you are actually learning. But also, I think the role of practitioners, and we're talking about governments as well, we must play the role of mentoring to students. Sometimes as practitioners, we forget the importance of giving opportunities to students and young designers. And part of the resourcefulness that is being mentioned here is actually about making design accessible so that people understand what it takes to actually be a creative person and what role that can play in society. So I think the discussions that are here are very much enabling for all of us to understand the complexity of design as an asset. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. Now I think I need to wrap up. It's a huge topic to just wrap up in 3 minutes. But starting from Mr. Aho's keynote speech, we were able to extract some important keywords and also hear some important phrases. I particularly liked a comment that says, we can design the edges. So instead of taking things given, we can just go out there and start creating our own edges and expand the sphere for us. I also like the comment that profit-making is a social asset. I think public sectors and private sectors should collaborate even more to make an impact in society. And I think money can play a big role. We can play a translation function as a translator of two different bodies if we wanted to. We can bring new ecosystem. I also like the phrase that Mr. Ako said, and many of us replied, I think it was more of Nila, but we need to find a way to apply technologies, because there are a lot of engineers and investors who would invest in technologies, but there are lack of resource like us. We can apply these technologies into the real services and products. And I think it's upon our shoulders. We're responsible to do that. So to conclude, I think we as designers and creative thinkers are good at solving problems, especially the complex problems. And economic development is one big complex problem that we should all act together. And I think worlds awaits us. Thank you very much.